Hi, everyone. It's good to see you tonight. Just wait a few minutes for some more people to join us. I hope you've all had a good week since I saw you last. It is a beautiful night here. You can go ahead and say hello in the comments. I can see all of your comments in the chat, so please say hello. And I'll wait a minute before I begin. I chose a little bit of a different background for us tonight. This background is also from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. This is called the Bankard Room, and it is a beautiful colonial room. You can see even out here, it's a second floor parlor. I'll step out of the scene for a moment. It's a second floor parlor, and very nicely done. So very nice. Although it wouldn't actually be so light out at this time of night, would it? Ooh, it would be dark. I unfortunately don't have a room that's dark on the outside of background to use, so I'm using this. So hello to everyone. It is March 1775, and I have just returned home from meeting with Mr. John Holt, the printer, and dropping off the current advertisement for my shop. And of course, while I was there, I couldn't help but talk to him about the current state of affairs between him and the printer across the street from him, Mr. James Rivington. The gentlemen are on opposite sides of Queen Street, not far from here. Excuse me. It is allergy time. They are not far from here. And while I was visiting with Mr. Holt, I couldn't help but discuss with him the current state of affairs between their two newspapers, which, if you have never seen their newspapers, this is what they look like. Let's get you Mr. Holt and Mr. Rivington's newspapers. So we have here the New York Gazetteer and Weekly Advertiser, which is Mr. Rivington's newspaper. And we have the New York Journal or the General Advertiser, Mr. Holt's newspaper. And these two gentlemen, for quite a long time now, have been engaged in a vicious back and forth with each other, which is somewhat amusing since they are right across the street from each other. But they use their newspapers to debate each other. And sometimes that debate gets very personal. Now, last year at this time, they had an enormous problem with terrible vitriolic language between the two gentlemen, which caused Mr. Holt to actually put a notice in his newspaper asking Mr. Rivington, oh, here they are, by the way, Mr. Holt on the top and Mr. Rivington on the bottom. So you can see that Mr. Holt is more, I would say, casual. Mr. Holt is a rather casual gentleman. He's not a dressy gentleman, as you can see from the top. Spends most of his time in his print shop and working. Mr. Rivington, on the other hand, you can see is the royal printer here and is much more attired as you would expect an official of the crown to be attired. Now, last year, the vitriol between the two gentlemen became so severe that Mr. Holt actually published this notice in his paper to Mr. Rivington, asking him to please address the unnecessary, excuse me, something just opened up on my computer that I didn't want. Asking him to please address the terrible invective that had been published in his newspaper the day before about him. And then he goes on to say that he has heard much worse about Mr. Rivington, yet he refuses to print it in his newspaper. So this gives you an idea of what has been going on between these two gentlemen for more than a year now, with both of them arguing over various things about the town. Now, mostly political things, as you can imagine, because things are very tense at this time, aren't they? Now, Mr. Rivington continues to present himself as a victim of the radicals or Sons of Liberty here in the town. And this is his latest depiction of his victimization. Do I have it here? Where is Rivington? Hold on, I have to put my non-historical glasses on for just a moment because it seems I might not have that picture for you. Mr. Rivington has presented himself as a victim of the New York Sons of Liberty by, I'm so embarrassed. I take a long time to make these for you, and it seems I forgot to make that one. Well, in his paper, he has depicted an image of his effigy recently hanged in New Brunswick, New Jersey. And I hear from various friends that the Mesereau brothers of Staten Island may have been involved in this prank. And they went to New Jersey. Mr. Q says he was not there, but he was missing on the day that this happened. They went to New Jersey and they hanged an effigy of Mr. Rivington. Mr. Rivington has printed a picture of his effigy hanging from a tree in his newspaper. And he said that the gentlemen who've done this to him are part of the dregs of the city, the lowest of the low. We might call them lowlifes. He says they're pediculous. That means lice infested. And they're filthy and inebriated. They're drunk. And he says, not on the juice of the vine, but cheap New England rum. And he just eviscerates them in this article. Now, I'm sure our friends in the Sons of Liberty are not going to be very happy about this, and will have some things to say to Mr. Rivington about the way he has so severely insulted them. Now, this, as I mentioned, has been going on hotly for the past year, but it's been going on much longer than the past year between these two gentlemen. Mr. Rivington taking the Crown and the Parliament side in these arguments, and Mr. Holt taking the more radical side in these arguments. So it was an interesting conversation this evening with Mr. Holt about how he feels about the current state of affairs between he and Mr. Rivington. And Mr. Holt, I think, thinks the whole thing is rather absurd. And I'm sure that this will continue on into the future until who knows what causes it to end. So a little bit about what's going on in the newspapers here in the city of New York. They are not the only two newspapers we have. We do have others, and it is rather typical of the newspaper printers to, let's say, present each other in not the kindest light. So here we have Mr. Rivington and Mr. Holt. Each representing the state of things in New York a very different way. And here again are the mastheads of their newspapers. If you have never seen newspapers from the 18th century, Mr. Rivington's Gazetteer and Mr. Holt's Journal. And so there they are. And you notice on Mr. Holt's Journal, he placed this masthead here last year, 1774. It's the snake. You may have seen it in your time. The rattlesnake cut up and labeled with the colonies, and the logo, unite or die. The idea being, if we were to unite, we would be as deadly as a rattlesnake. And if not, we will surely die like cut up segments. And this is in reference to what's been happening in Boston and encouraging the colonies to unite together in the support of Boston. And if you don't know what's happening in Boston, we'll be talking about that in a minute or two. We'll get to that. So the two newspapers, of course, Mr. Rivington has the king's arms on the top of his paper, as he is still loyal to the king, the crown, and the parliament. So two very different messages on the newspaper. So when you pick up your newspaper, you have a pretty fair idea of what you're going to find by what you see in the masthead of the newspaper. So there we have Mr. Holt and Mr. Rivington. And again, Mr. Holt's demand of an apology from Mr. Rivington. Now, also surprisingly going on here in the town, wait a minute, this is not the one I wanted to show you. I'm sorry. I seem to not be as well organized tonight as I usually like to be. There we go. So you see some names on this, and this also is from last year. And these were the gentlemen whose names were put forward to attend the first Continental Congress, which you may remember met last year. And on this, right on the top, you see Mr. Isaac Lowe. Mr. Lowe, like me, is a merchant, very well known here in New York, well known for his political activities, for representing us at the Congress, and also for his involvement with the committees of correspondence and the protesting against the Stamp Act and the Quartering Act and the Tea Act. But Mr. Lowe has recently made it clear, and here he is, has recently made it clear that he is now quitting politics for good because he said it's nothing but full of malevolence and factionalism. So Mr. Lowe, unfortunately, will no longer be participating. He said that if he is elected to the Second Continental Congress, he will not attend. So don't vote for him. He says, don't vote for me because I will not attend. I have had enough of these political things, and I just want to go back to my business and leave it to the other men. So shockingly, Mr. Lowe has declared himself retired from the city's politics. So very, very interesting there. Now, of course, politics is always the topic everywhere we go today, including in my shop. And the ladies in my shop are, we say, outspoken about their beliefs of politics, but not always the best informed on the subjects. Now, most of the ladies who come into my shop, and I don't mean this in any way insultingly, their biggest concern is fashion. The latest fabrics, the latest styles, the latest accessories, and being presentable publicly. Most of their conversation and knowledge runs the length of fashion. Now, there are other ladies in the town and around the town, and especially if you leave and you travel a bit out into the country, you have ladies there who also are not very knowledgeable about politics, and many of them don't read and write. And that is not to in any way put down the country ladies who work every minute of the day, sometimes late into the night, just to keep their households, their families, and their homesteads running. So we have those ladies who aren't book learned, but through no fault of their own, simply because they don't have the time, nor do they have anyone to teach them. So let's not assume that those ladies are not valuable to our cause, because they are. They work hard, they support their husbands and families, and they are a vital part of our success here in the colonies. No, the ladies I'm talking about are the ladies who do have the time, and they do have the resources, and they do have people around them who could educate them, they could learn, but their desire is not to. So we have a handful of ladies in the town who are somewhat educated and who put reason before emotion and put reason before fashion and popularity. A handful of those ladies with whom it's always a pleasure to discuss what's going on in the town, as they are, well versed in things. And then there are simply the ladies who come into the shop who have no real opinion of their own. It pretty much just depends on what opinion will make their husbands the most successful. They're much more opinionated on the type of fabric a scarf may be made out of, or whether a bonnet is fashionable, whether the ruffles are fashionable, and what type of fabric it is. So those are the ladies I'm feeling a little, let's say, anxious about, because they have a lot to say, but not a lot of knowledge about what they're saying. And let's not say that the gentlemen aren't the same. We have plenty of gentlemen who have a lot to say and who are not very well informed about what they're saying. So I guess maybe that is just human nature, but it's definitely becoming more and more of a problem here as our differences with England become more and more severe. Let me go over here. It would have been nice if I had opened up the chat, which I forgot to do. Let's see who's here. Mr. White is here. I put on my, getting old and I need my glasses, Mr. Keenster is here. Good evening. Sparrowhawk 76. Hello. It has been a while. Mr. Buffalo, my first time seeing you, your first time seeing me live. I hope you're enjoying it. And a few other people. Oh, and Ms. Turley, who I haven't seen in a while either. Thank you all for joining me. So this is our situation here in New York in March of 1775. And who would have thought things could get worse than 1774? But clearly they have. They obviously have. And everyone argues with everyone over everything. And the problem is the situation in Boston. Oh, my dog Rex has joined us. Ms. LaBelle is here from, I think it says New Jersey, but I have to put on my glasses and I don't want to. Um, the situation in Boston has caused all sorts of difficulty and havoc throughout the colonies. Do you recall, almost 2 years ago now, the Tea Act, the attempt to financially rescue the East India Company from their financial uh, decisions that have gone poorly by selling their tea here in America with no customs or tariffs or duties on it. All products that come in and out of the ports here in America are subject to customs. That is the tax collection that helps the government to run. That is the way the government acquires its income, through tariffs or duties or customs. And, as I have mentioned before, this has caused quite a lot of smuggling to go on here in the colonies as well. People trying to avoid paying those duties. And it's very easy to pay off the local customs agent to sneak some things through without payment. But in general, everything going through is subject to these customs, these taxes. Now, what the Parliament did 2 years ago was remove the tax on the East India Company's tea coming into America, which would make it incredibly cheap, much cheaper than all of the other teas in America, and thus pretty much granting it a monopoly on sale here in the colonies. Because if it's so cheap, no one will buy any other tea. They'll just buy the East India tea. Now, the other problem with the East India tea wasn't their finest quality tea. It was tea that had been sitting in the warehouses in London for a very long time, as they had too much tea in London to sell. So it was extra inventory due to their bad planning. So they decided that this old tea would be sold here in the colonies at a very cheap price. And this caused us here to begin the arguing among each other. As many people were happy to buy the cheaper tea, they felt that it was a good situation. Well, of course, we'll buy the cheaper tea. This will help our finances and we'll be able to buy more things with our money left over. Although others said, no, don't buy the tea because it will help support the East India Company getting rescued. It will also start a possible precedent where the East India Company will be granted a monopoly on importing other items. And of course, some of the gentlemen said, well, we'll just wind up paying the tax elsewhere, right? That England isn't going to give up their taxes. They'll just find another way to tax us on something else to make up for the shortfall. So now we became divided over whether or not to allow the East India tea to even come into America, and if it did, whether or not we should buy it at all. Let's see, Mr. Linden is here. That's right, he says, because the company is too big to fail. Too big to fail, 1773. The Tea Act. This is exactly what it is. So now the arguing and bickering began here. People on the side of the East India Company proclaimed that if the East India Company failed, the British Empire would fall, and all of the great success we had here, since they believed that success we have here was due to Britain, not ourselves. You didn't build that. England built it for you. What's the story? Of course, not true. We built everything here ourselves. But the idea was that since that we could not survive without England, that England had planted us and nurtured us and helped us to grow, where others here said that was ridiculous, that everything we had here we built ourselves, that our success was fully our own, and that if the East India Company failed, too bad, we could make it ourselves. And thus began the argument over the tea. until that winter when some of the tea ships made their way into Boston Harbor. Now, in general, the tea ships did not come into the harbors because there was so much protesting, so much threat of violence that the tea ships did not enter the harbors. But in Boston, they did. And there became a big debate in Boston over whether or not those ships should be removed further out into the harbor. And when the ships were not moved, the gentlemen in Boston, dressed up like the native people, boarded the ship and threw the tea into the harbor, what has become known as the Boston Tea Party, a huge volume of tea, very valuable to the East India Company. And it was at that time that the East India Company wanted the men responsible arrested to make restitution for their losses. And Boston would not give the men up. They refused to give them up. And at that time, the Parliament then instituted the Boston Port Act and punished everyone in Boston for the actions of a few. The Boston Port Act effectively removed Boston and Massachusetts civilian government, the government they had had for 150 years, right? They had their own courts, they had their own legislature, they had a civilian governor, all gone now. England removed all of it. They moved General Thomas Gage, who we had the pleasure of having here in New York City for about 12 years as commander of the King's Army in America, moved General Gage and his forces to Boston, where he instituted a fully military government. So they no longer had their own civilian government. They became under military rule. They also no longer were subject to their own courts, but sent to England for trial or tried in military courts. I should also add, they embargoed Boston Harbor. They set up a blockade so none of the ships could get in and out of the harbor in the hopes of destroying Boston's economy and forcing them to England's will. Well, it's been a year now since that happened, and Boston is still holding strong. People in the colonies, the men in the colonies, many of them have gone to Boston to help shore up the militia there. And other people in the colonies are sending goods to Boston over land to help them out. But the situation there grows more and more tense, as it does throughout the colonies, as the various colonies now argue over whether or not to support Boston, and as a result, argue over whether or not to send delegates to a second Continental Congress. And that is the big argument that is happening now in New York. And it is the reason that these two gentlemen are exchanging so much vitriol back and forth across Queen Street every week in their newspapers, whether or not to send gentlemen to the Second Continental Congress, and if so, how should they be elected? And this argument is going on throughout the colonies. We're not the only colony having this argument, as there are many people who believe we should not send delegates to the Second Continental Congress because that will be rebellious, and it will be viewed by England as a rebellious move, and that we will come under the same rule as Massachusetts, as Boston, that before you know it, our charters will be removed, we will have martial law, and we will have lost all of our freedoms. Now, some gentlemen, like last week, Mr. Patrick Henry in Virginia, said it's too late to worry about that, that is coming if we want to believe it or not, that is coming, that the massive buildup of military in Boston is not meant only for Boston. As Mr. Henry said, what adversary does Britain have in this hemisphere that requires such a massive buildup of power? He says none. Obviously, we are all the targets of that military. And of course, word has come back to us from our colonial agents in London that is precisely the plan, that the Crown will fan out from Massachusetts and New England down the coastline and subdue every colony in turn. So if that is true and you believe that, then electing gentlemen to the Second Continental Congress would make no difference anyway, would it? because if military occupation is their plan, whether or not we send delegates will not matter. Here in New York, everyone is arguing over whether we should send these delegates. Some people believe we should not. Others believe that that is abandoning our brothers and sisters in Boston, and that it's cowardly, and that we shouldn't think only of ourselves, but that we should think of all of us here on this continent as one, all of us as American colonists who need to stick together to defeat England, as we did in the Stamp Act, the Quartering Act, and maybe would have with the Tea Act had this incident in Boston not occurred. Not that I'm blaming the Bostonians, because I fully understand their frustration and their anger at the East India Tea Company and the ships coming into their harbor. And that's all past anyway, isn't it? Because here we are now in this terrible situation. Now, one of the things we have also done to protest what's happening in Boston is to enter into another non-importation, non-exportation agreement, which means that we in America will not export any goods to England, meaning raw materials that they need for their manufacturing, and we will not buy anything traveling on English ships, meaning all of their manufactures that they sell back to us here. We have done this in the past, and this was the way we successfully defeated the Stamp Act. And it is always of great economic hurt to us. And I have to say, I'm talking about it earlier, my store, there's virtually nothing new in my store. All I have is old inventory, whatever I had before the non-importation, non-exportation agreement went into effect, as we have all agreed not to accept anything coming into the ports on English ships. So I have very little inventory in my store. The ladies come in and pick through what's there, but anyone looking for newest, latest fashions, we're not getting them at this time. And some ladies have preferred no longer to wear any imported fabrics, but to wear only homespun, local fabrics, the local cottons, linens, and wools that are manufactured, spun here on the American continent. So we tend to be very careful with what we wear outside, because if we're wearing any imported silks or laces or anything like that, we may be in some trouble walking down the street. People might throw some dirt at you or some other object to express their displeasure that you're not wearing homespun. So it'd be important to be wearing that at around this time, and many people have reverted to it. Now, with the Non-Importation Act, all of the city's merchants signed on to this, but we did have someone who violated the act, and that was Robert and John Murray, the Murray brothers, who own a shipping company. So they are one of the companies that I work with all the time. They bring goods in for me on their ships. They had a ship coming back to America named for their oldest daughter, Beulah. And on the ship, Beulah was already filled with all sorts of goods they had already paid for, right? Because we pay for those goods at their origination point, we bring them in, and then we sell them, right? Hopefully for more than what we paid. So that, of course, is how inventory and stores, shops work. Well, the Murray brothers, of course, wanted to bring their ship in because they didn't want to lose the money they had already invested in the contents of the ship, but they knew they could not bring the ship directly into New York, that would be horrible disaster for them. Instead, they brought it to Elizabeth, New Jersey, right on the other side of the harbor. And at night, they unloaded the contents there, thinking no one would see them. Unfortunately for the Murrays, our friends in the Sons of Liberty in New Jersey did see them unload the ship, contacted their friends here in New York, and when the Beulah came into the dock here in New York, it was met with 500 men who threatened the captain and all of the crew of the ship to not try to dock the ship or take anything off of the ship. And I cannot express to you how scandalous this event was, because it was another in a line of events when New York seemingly broke the unity of the other colonies, where we did not go along with the other colonies United, we are strong against England, but not united, we are weak. We need to be together in these activities. So when word of this, of course, reached our local members of the Sons of Liberty and our council, they decided, because the Murrays had embarrassed us in front of all of the other colonies and caused us so much harm, that the Murray family would be banished from New York, that they would have to move elsewhere. Of course, none of the other colonies would take them. So this became a grave situation for the Murrays. Now, Mrs. Murray, Mary Murray, a brilliant lady, let me tell you, one of the most brilliant ladies here, not only socially, but business-wise, wrote a letter, we hear, to Captain Alexander McDougall, with whom she'd been friends for quite some time, and told Mr. McDougall that if they were banished, the Sons of Liberty would make homeless, wandering paupers of the women and children of New York. And isn't that too high a price to pay for what her husband had done? And she asks them for mercy and says, "Sir, you don't want to be responsible for such a horrible situation that will befall me and my children." And as a result, the Murrays were given an option. And that option was to, was to place an apology in the American newspapers. And here it is. Robert and John Murray apologizing for what they have done. And with that deal, the Murrays will remain in New York as they were before. Now, talking about ladies, Mary Murray becomes one of the smartest ladies in the town when she achieves this. So let's not forget what some of the ladies are up to behind the scenes. And some of you might know that next year in 1776, Mrs. Murray is going to do something superb for General Washington. If you don't know, I'm not going to give it away tonight. You'll have to keep watching until we get to where we talk about the battle for New York. So now, another shocking thing has come into press. And look at this, my camera is not refocusing. I just bought a new camera right from the future, 2025, and it doesn't refocus. I'm sorry, I have to turn it off and back on, and it still is not refocusing. Let me move around a little bit. This is so annoying. There we go. Just takes it a little time to refocus. Now, of course, one of the things we're also interested in here in New York is what is happening in England. What is happening in England? How are they relating to what we are doing here? And what are their plans for us? And what do they think of us? And it recently came to our attention that Mr. Edmund Burke gave a very interesting speech in the House of Commons. I don't know if you know who Mr. Burke is. Mr. Burke is from Dublin, Ireland. He graduated Trinity College and has been a member of Parliament for some time, a very well-respected gentleman. Edmund Burke believes that we in the colonies are Englishmen and deserving of all of the rights and privileges of all subjects of the crown. Mr. Burke also believes that a successful government and life comes with virtue, self-control, education, and an ability to support oneself, so financial success. So Mr. Burke has been highly supportive of us here. He was against the Stamp Act. He was against the Quartering Act. He was against the Tea Act. There was quite an exchange between Mr. Burke and another member of Parliament over the Boston Port Act, when Mr. Burke spoke up and said that the Boston Port Act was one of the most ridiculous things he'd heard of, because he said by withdrawing the charter in New England and Massachusetts, that the other colonies would simply look at their charters and call them null and void as well. And one of the gentlemen in the parliament, I don't remember who this was, I don't recall, got up and asked Mr. Burke why he should have to follow an agreement made between the colony and the crown more than 150 years ago, long before any of them had ever been born. Why should we have to honor that? None of us signed off on that. None of us were signatories to that. None of us agreed to that. And Mr. Burke remarked that in all of his years in the parliament, he had heard stupid things, but this had to be the dumbest thing he had ever heard. As he said, that attitude means none of the colonial charters are worth anything, and predicted that one day, if they did that, the other colonies would say that theirs were meaningless as well and might declare themselves separate from England. I don't know. I wonder if something like that would ever happen. Things are so terrible between all of us. What would happen if the other colonies, if New York, for instance, said, well, if you can remove Boston's charter so easily, we'll simply remove our own. Why do we need you? We have the Hudson River, we have the East River, we have the harbor, the Atlantic Ocean, we have our great interior, we have everything we need to be self-sufficient and to be wealthy without you in England, without your enemies. And I think it was Captain McDougall who actually said that once, that if we didn't fly the king's flag, we would no longer have England's enemies. We would no longer have England's worries. We could be on our own and be successful, that we had proven from what we built here that we could be successful on our own. And it seems that Mr. Burke himself was worried that this very thing might occur. But they passed the Boston Port Act anyway, which brings us to this horrible situation in which we find ourselves with a massive Army and Navy buildup happening in Boston, with the other colonies now arguing among ourselves whether or not to hold a second Continental Congress. Now, some colonies have already designated their men who are going to attend that Congress. Here in New York, I believe we will choose gentlemen to go, but there is now a debate over how they should be chosen and by whom. Of course, the Loyalist faction, which is heavily concentrated here in New York City, wants those delegates to be chosen here. And the rest of the colony wants each county to be able to vote on their own delegates, as that will balance things out with the country areas of the colony. So that debate is still raging here in New York, although I am sure that we will send representatives again, except for Mr. Isaac Lowe, who says, don't vote for me, because if you do, I will not attend, as I have finished with all politics. He may be the smartest of all of us. So more recently, Edmund Burke, Mr. Burke, who, by the way, was the colonial agent for New York for some time, meaning he was our agent in the Parliament who helped us with all of our difficulties here. If there were difficulties of governance, of taxation, difficulties getting along with the other colonies, Mr. Burke was our agent in the Parliament. So he knows New York very well, and he knows the spirit of the colonies very well, and the temper of us in the colonies very well. And I think I have some text from Mr. Burke's speech here. I do have some for you. So Mr. Burke is advocating peace here through reconciliation with us. My dog Rex says, and I think he is onto something here, sounds like a gang of madmen bickering over who will claim God's green earth for themselves. Well, that is just the regular state of affairs here in the colony of New York, Mr. Rex. This is just the way we live here. But I think you have pretty much summed it up properly. So Mr. Burke believes in reconciliation, and he believes that England should be the first to offer that reconciliation because he says they are more powerful. And he says the more powerful entity can offer reconciliation and still appear powerful. He says where if the weaker party asks for reconciliation, they look weaker. So he says it is incumbent upon Britain as the more powerful entity to offer peace and reconciliation to the colonies. And he means true reconciliation and peace, not at the end of swords or cannon or muskets, but without the military present, a withdrawal of the military entirely and an overture toward peace with us. And he says, why are we even fighting our English brethren in the colonies? And here is a quote from his speech. He says, as to the good people of England, they seem to partake every day more and more of the character of that administration which they have been induced to tolerate. I am satisfied that within a few years, there has been a great change in the national character. We seem no longer that eager, inquisitive, jealous, fiery people which we have been formerly. So, what is that administration, he says, which they have been induced to tolerate? And this you may find somewhat shocking, but he says it is King George himself, who is a Germanic king employing the swords of German boors and vassals to destroy the English liberties in America. And by that quote, he means the Hessian mercenaries who are here. King George is indeed German. And here we have the great Edmund Burke, one of the greatest philosophers of government in the parliament today, standing up in that body, saying the problem with the colonies, all of the problems we're having, are the result of a German king who does not understand what it is to be an Englishman, does not understand what England is or what England stands for. And then he warns them and he says, Americans, through their heredity, education, manners, religious principles, forms of government, and distance from Great Britain, have been imbued with an intense passion for liberty and will under no circumstances yield to force. Well, I suppose it's good for Mr. Burke that his speech on the floor of the House of Commons is protected. The gentlemen speaking in the Commons or in the House of Lords have free speech, and that speech is protected from prosecution. Or I think his remarks about the German king being the problem that England is facing with the colonies might land him in a very unpleasant situation. We were stunned to read these words, which make Mr. Burke a great man and an honest man, and a man who is worried about the future of his great country, England, and is worried about us here in the colonies. Very worried. You may know that he was not the only one who has encouraged the king and the parliament to remove the troops from Boston. William Pitt, the Earl of Chatham, Lord Chatham, has also warned them to remove the troops from Boston. He says the first shot will be mortal. It will be a wound that will cause a mortal injury to the whole body. He fears that if that shot is fired here, the colonies will be lost to England. Neither Mr. Burke or Mr. Pitt or a number of other Whig lords believe that England can defeat us in a war. Is that interesting? Because we have many men here who don't believe we can defeat England in a war. They believe England will beat us easily, but we have these gentlemen right in England, in the House of Commons and in Lords, who think they can't defeat us. Remember, England has reduced the size of their military greatly due to the costs of the French and Indian War. So they are not at their greatest capacity. They also don't know their way around here. And as Mr. Pitt said, and as a number of other people echoed, everyone here will fight for what they have built. Or I think it was General Gage himself, when he recently was ordered to march out of Boston to the local communities and confiscate the powder and the guns, responded that he would not do it because he said he didn't have enough men. He said everyone over the age of 12 in this country owns a firearm and is skilled in the use of it. And he says that if I try to do this, they will surely line the roads and shoot us as we pass. Good thinking on the part of General Gage, and I hope that he plans to stay with that plan of action. because it would indeed be very foolish for him to try to disarm the people of Massachusetts. And I can't even imagine the type of disaster that might cause to happen if he were to try to do that, because I do believe that the men of Massachusetts would line the roads and shoot the English as they passed. And then where would we be in a shooting war with England? Who knows what would happen then? So here we are in March of 1775, increasingly divided about what we should do and the path forward, not even able to count on each other as neighbors or friends or family members, and sometimes not even be able to count on each other as colonies. Boston needs us and needs all of us to stand with Boston, because if we don't, separate, we will be conquered one at a time. As Mr. Patrick Henry said in his speech in Virginia, that he said, what are we waiting for? He said, we'll be no stronger than we are now. And he said, the war is already here. Let it come to all of us. And then he ended with his wonderful words, give me liberty or give me death. And like Mr. Henry, I'd like to ask, is peace and safety so important that you're willing to buy it with chains and slavery? So think about that. We look to see, does anyone have any questions or comments tonight? It's always wonderful to see all of you. Always happy to have you here with me on Thursdays as I get back into my Mrs. Q live routine and doing these for you on Thursday nights. I am going to be producing and releasing a series of Mrs. Q shorts leading into America 250. I'm just getting together my little studio to do those, and I'll be releasing those on Facebook and YouTube and perhaps also on X. There'll be little 2-minute pieces 2 or 3 times a week with Mrs. Q talking about what's going on that day, now in the year 1775, and I plan to do them through 1775 and 1776. So please watch for them. And thank you so much all for supporting my work. And I hope you have a wonderful week. Until next time, I'll see you then. And thank you for watching Mrs. Q Live. Good night, everyone.